This election, we are going to decide whether, on the one hand, we're going to have a rebirth of the founding principles upon which this nation was built, of liberty and freedom and hard work and faith in God and individual initiative and self-reliance, or whether or not we're going to go down the road of European-style socialism, of state-owned and operated industries, of the government usurping every single area of our lives, economic, religious, personal, financial, our health, all of the above, until ultimately, through a combination of runaway spending, unmanageable debt, dragging down our economy, we will end up where Portugal, Spain, and Greece are. And that's not what I believe God would desire for our country. Because we've been given a birthright that other people all over the world hunger for and have crossed oceans and have crawled on their hands and knees across borders to come to. And that idea that they were hungering for was the right to rise as high and as far as their talents could carry them, with the blessing of God, free from any kind of a caste system or a class system that would hold you back, as even to this day it does in countries like Great Britain, where you can't get into certain schools unless you came from a particular family. That's not the way America was built. And if we lose that ideal, if we lose the idea, as the founders said in the Declaration, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the founders went on in that document to assert something that was the most radical idea that has ever been introduced to the human race. And that was that if at any point subsequent to establishing the government, the sole purpose of which was to protect those God-given rights. That's the purpose of government, is to ensure and protect those rights against any threat, foreign or domestic. If at any point the Declaration says the government failed to protect those rights, or it begins to infringe upon those clear God-given rights, then it is not just the right, it is the duty and obligation of the free people so assembled to overthrow that government and start over with a new one. Now, if there's anybody here from some left-wing blog or website and you're going to put the grainy video up, I'm just quoting the Declaration of Independence. Okay, that's what they said. And when you think about what's happened in just 3 short years under this administration, taking over the automobile companies, and by the way, now claiming what a great success that was, while they basically vitiated the rights of bondholders, who had loaned the companies money. They gave 40% of General Motors to the United Auto Workers Union in basically a crony capitalist payoff. And, this was an industry that was the envy and marvel of the modern world. The automobile was invented and perfected here. The rest of the world imitated us. And now it's basically a subsidiary of the government. And this administration has put a gun to the head of General Motors and made them spend $3 billion on the Chevy Volt. And I think they've produced it. I don't want to offend anybody who's a Chevy Volt driver, but I think for $3 billion they've produced 2,000 of them. They've got another electric car company, I think it's Fisker, that is going to be making the car in Sweden. So they've given Fisker $500 million in loan guarantees. They were supposed to have produced 11,000 electric cars by the end of 2011. They haven't produced one. This is what happens when the federal government tries to run things. They took over AIG, the largest insurance company in the world, gave them $80 billion. They took over the mortgage industry, which is basically a $5 trillion total portfolio. The cost of bailing out Fannie and Freddie sits today at $144 billion and counting. And that was just his first 60 days in office. You know, if you go on the internet, either Bing or Google, and you Google Hugo Chavez Obama, what comes up is a meeting between Chavez and Castro, in which Castro gets up and says, I would have never thought to nationalize the automobile company. Comrade Obama has done far more than we would have ever thought to do. This is a Reuters story. Look it up. This is how radical and out of the mainstream this president is. And then there's Obamacare. And Sid was talking earlier about this latest mandate. I think that this was a game changer in the 2012 election. And I'll tell you why. Not only because it showed how tone deaf, not only how utterly insensitive to the religious and moral sensibilities of the American people, not only outright hostility to the rights of religious institutions to propagate their faith and to share their faith and practice their faith free from government regulation and harassment. And by the way, keep in mind that 1 out of every 6 patients in a hospital bed tonight is in a Catholic hospital. Okay? 1 out of every 10 Americans below the poverty level in America is a client of Catholic Charities USA. If you look, and I'm sure this is true of the Miami Archdiocese and probably many others, if you look at just the Baltimore, Maryland Archdiocese, they are training, educating, feeding, and touching over 300,000 people a year. And they have over 160,000 people below the poverty level in the greater Baltimore area that they're either housing or clothing or feeding or educating. Folks, the social safety net in America is a faith-based safety net. It is not ultimately a government safety net. That's just the reality. And by the way, 90% of the homeless shelters in America are operated by either a church or a synagogue or a religious ministry. So this is a dagger aimed at the heart of religious expression in America. It is going to tear asunder the fabric of our safety net. But in addition to that, it really pulls back the curtain on what Obamacare will look like when fully implemented in 2014 in a second Obama administration. Does anybody believe for 1 minute, if this guy didn't have to face the voters again, that they would have walked out some compromise? Oh no. This was fully debated within the administration. And Vice President Biden and Bill Daley, the outgoing White House Chief of Staff, they have leaked like a sieve to the New York Times and everybody else. We were against this. He knew exactly what he was doing. And I will tell you, I support, and we at Faith and Freedom Coalition are making one of our top priorities passing Senator Rubio's legislation to repeal this mandate against religious institutions, ministries, hospitals, and educational institutions. They should be allowed to practice their faith in God free from any interference from the Obama administration or anybody else. after we beat Bill Nelson here in Florida, after George Allen replaces Tim Kaine in Virginia, and after Denny Rayburn beats John Tester, and we win the Senate back, let me tell you what's going to happen. Repeal of Obamacare. That's already passed the House. It's already passed the House. All right? A Republican Senate will also pass the repeal legislation and leave it on the ash heap of history where it is. I've probably gone on too long as it is, and I want to allow some time for Q&A. So let me just tell you how we're going to win this election. It's going to be very simple. It's not going to be easy. I promise you this is going to be the hardest job you've ever loved. You're going to work harder than you've ever worked to win this election. Because this is an administration that can't run on its record. How do you run on a record of more people living in poverty than at any time in American history? Okay? 13 million people out of work. And by the way, I don't know if anybody heard Sean Hannity this afternoon. He was pointing out that the Gallup organization that polls every night, I mean the Gallup organization is the most sophisticated public opinion survey organization in the world. And what they do is, rather than doing all this, you know, monkey business like they do at the Labor Department under this administration, is they just poll people and ask them if they have a job. And under the Gallup survey, the unemployment rate is still 9%. And it would be 9% today, but for the 3 million people that they have backed out of the workforce. Do you know that in January, when supposedly unemployment dropped to 8.3%, do you know in that month alone, this administration claims that 1.1 million people left the workforce? If you believe that, I've got a bridge to nowhere I want to sell you. Okay? So they can't run on their record. 13 million unemployed, 47 million people on food stamps. Half of all the people without a job in America today have been without a job for 6 months or more. That is the highest percentage of persistent long-term unemployment since the Great Depression. Now that's his economic record. Let's look at his fiscal record. He's going to double the national debt in just one term. He's going to be the first president in U.S. history to have trillion-dollar deficits every single year he was in office.